sex is a topic we don't talk about as adults. And it baffles me because it is the only activity that we do as adults that we don't talk about. Even if we're like making a meal with each other or going to the cinema or whatever, we'll think about, okay, what time is it? What are you gonna like buy for the ingredients that we're gonna make this meal together? Somehow we expect sex to just like people just to mind read each other. You see couples therapy and that sort of thing depicted on TV. That's pretty much what I do. But it also focuses on sex largely because that's a big component of a relationship. And so anyone who is maybe struggling with something sexually may come to a psychosexual therapist. So initially I studied clinical psychology, and sex and relationships was an aspect of that, but it wasn't the main focus. And then while I was working in pediatrics, I discovered that working with families was really interesting to me because of the impact of an illness on a child and what that would do to a couple. Then I decided that because I enjoyed it, I wanted to learn more about it. So then I went to study relationship and psychosexual therapy. I work with a variety of clients, working age adults, anyone at all who is maybe concerned about a relationship or a pattern in relationships, or also people who have mental health concerns. You know, they may be recovering from depression or anxiety. In relation to couples, I've worked, my oldest has been about a couple who are 75 and 78. I try not to work with children, although I've had a 16-year-old at the request of a parent. Often I will see people who are maybe have just finished a relationship. The relationship has ended and they're concerned about what the next relationship will bring. Sometimes there's a sexual component, like, for example, if I see someone who has erectile dysfunction, for example, and they're concerned that, okay, that's the reason they might pin the failing of the relationship on that. I'm never convinced that is the reason, but then they're motivated to kind of improve things so that that won't occur again in the next relationship. I personally never think that the erectile whatever the psychosexual concern is, I don't think it's as simple as just pinning it all on that. There's often communication issues, often anxieties that come with that, often identity issues that come with that. These all interact because something as purely like erectile dysfunction doesn't stop someone from having a satisfying sex life, because there are so many things that we can do that have nothing to do with the quality of an erection that will still be sexually satisfying. Generally, I think people don't know enough about sex. A lot of my job is psychoeducation, even anatomy. Like, most people have no idea what a clitoris looks like. And I'm not just talking about what people think it is, which is just this little tip thing, but it actually, a much bigger organ exists inside the vulva, but we just can't see it. I think a lot of my job is educational, but I think that we have lots of narratives in society. That sexual desire, for example, is a spontaneous thing that just happens. You need to be sexually ready at all times, and that's just not the reality. That's not how relationships work. That's not how a human body works. And I think that the messages we receive skew our understanding of our own sexual selves. For males, the sexual ready component thing, that myth is maybe more prevalent, and there's more pressure to be that type of male, Often the women that I see often don't, maybe during sex are slightly more performative, and therefore because they're focusing on the experience of their partner, they can't really be present in their body, and then that gets in the way of their own sexual pleasure. That's the one I see mostly. People will come in and they're like, I have no sex drive, and it's not my problem, it's my partner's problem. So that's an interesting dynamic in the room, because then there's like power and, and ownership of your body, and like, how does that manifest within the relationship? Now we're just talking about sex, but how does that play out? So often sex shows what is happening within the relationship, right? Even though it's a physical act, we often kind of misconstrue all the other things, because imagine when you're having sex, all of the things that you have been taught, your political beliefs about gender, about religion, culture, all of these things are happening in your mind while you're having sex. You don't like disconnect. It's not purely physical. And whatever dynamics are happening in the relationship also add to what you experience sexually. One or two people come in usually, and they have a complaint. And the complaint may be something like, I don't know where my sex drive has gone, and my partner is feeling rejected, and I'm sad that they feel that way, and it's not my intention. Yeah. And then I will take kind of like a sexual history. Usually I see people on their own once. I have a time with them where they can say anything without the partner. And then they come in together and we'll work through what I call a psychosexual program. It's like retraining. They have to agree to a sex ban. We go really, really back to basics with their bodies and their sexual self. So I ask them to do certain exercises, first on their own and then together. And then because the exercises won't lead to having sex, they can stay present and not worry that it's going to lead to sex. Because if you have a concern sexually, then there's likely to be anxiety around it. So I'm trying to kind of remove the anxiety from the experience, and keep them present in their body and relearn with each other what feels good and what they want to do more of. And throughout this process, they're communicating a lot with each other about like likes, dislikes. What did this make me feel? What did this make me think? Ooh, I'm discovering something new. And newness is so, so, so important, because as soon as you like learn something little bit about yourself and you're interested in that and you're curious about that, just exploring it and talking about it with your partner can be really a creative process and exciting. And we need that little bit of excitement sexually to keep us kind of engaged. So people have very, very different ideas about frequency, like what is okay frequency. Some people are like every day, twice a day. Some people are like once a week. There are definitely personal myths around that. And I think what causes problems is when the couple haven't shared with each other what is their myth. Sex is a topic we don't talk about as adults. And it baffles me because it is the only activity that we do as adults that we don't talk about. Even if we're like making a meal with each other or going to the cinema or whatever, we'll think about, okay, what time is it? What are you gonna like buy for the ingredients that we're gonna make this meal together? Somehow we expect sex to just like people just to mind read each other, and or we hint. We have like really clumsy conversations about sex, or it's during sex, which is not the right time. We are simply not engaging in conversations that are comfortable and feel normal and natural about sex. We stop doing the things that we would respond to sexually. So think about it, like in a long-term relationship, we stop dating, we stop flirting, we stop like texting suggestive things And these are the things that someone would respond to that would make them feel like more, desirous. And when we stop doing these things, then we have nothing to respond to. And now we're just like, pajama friends or whatever we are. It's not going to happen because your brain is functioning differently in the first, year or so thereabouts of a new romantic relationship. That's not sustainable. Your brain is not meant to function that way all the time. And I just think it's our assumption that stops people, the assumption that should be spontaneous, that stops people that reduces the frequency of sex in a long-term relationship. I don't know if you've heard of something called the Madonna whore complex. We have a lot of images of women in one of these two roles, the Madonna, as in the virginal, pure Madonna, and the whore. And it's kind of either one or the other. So sometimes what happens is that, let's say a woman becomes a mother. Now she's the mother, and what does that mean? She's no longer a sexual being? Of course, she's still a sexual being. But because we've projected on our ideas of what motherhood means, she can no longer be sexual because that's what we see. And this is part of the Madonna whore kind of complex where we split these two roles. So I agree that yes, life becomes more complicated and we get busier and but I think it's also how we think about that and how we think about sex and why can't they all exist together. I think a lot of people feel like it's the only solution, but at the same time, it's often a solution that feels really redundant and people kind of lose hope after a period of like having, experiences that you kind of need to heal from and they're icky and you don't know who you're meeting. But it can also be lots of fun and exciting and lots of people meet each other through apps. My issue with it is that it often feels like the only solution or the last resort or, it's like I've exhausted and we don't meet people in person anymore. And so therefore I'm doing this. We have become a little bit like complacent is the word about the different options of meeting, of how you can meet people, especially when the phone, the app is so easy. It's like in your hand. I think if you genuinely have asked yourself, what do I want? And then you're communicating, you've chosen the right app for that purpose and you're communicating that with other people. Great. That's a great use of that app. The idea is that there's open dialogue about what type of relationships people actually want. And often people will feel like, well, I have a lot of love to give and it's not limited just to one person. I can love multiple people. Or maybe it's just a sexual thing, right? So maybe I have a primary partner, for example, and then I'm allowed to play away. And then there's negotiations of how does that happen? What does the partner, the primary want to know? Do they want to know? Does it only happen in certain situations, like when I'm away, for example? In my work, I will help people write up a contract, an agreement. And, obviously safe sex is part of that, a big component of that. I do think it's becoming more like fashionable or something. I think there's more people, even if they're not having E&Ms, some more people are entertaining the idea. One of the big dilemmas about relationships is how do you sustain love and excitement and respect and all the great things that relationships give in a long-term relationship, right? E&M is one way, potentially, of finding a solution. The issue is that often the solution creates more problems, but it's a kind of sidestep to think, okay, maybe this is a way I could make it work. I would have to do these things in order to for that to happen. A lot of this is about self-awareness. So, for example, where it works is when someone has done the internal work and understood that this is their preference. And then when they meet someone else, they communicate that openly. There's no surprises. Maybe they're lucky enough to meet someone who has also been thinking about that and knows how they feel, and then they can kind of co-create something, right? That's the ideal situation. And there's no guarantees that can work or not work. When it's one person pushing any agenda on the other, there tends to be obviously more issues. And I always suggest that if your sex life is not a happy sex life, don't involve another person. In my mind, it only works if you're both kind of relatively happy, even though understanding that let's say it's a couple who are in an open relationship. They're never going to both be totally happy at the same time. So it's not like, okay, you can both arrange dates on a specific day and both come back at it. No, you will, one of them may enter into something, it may be emotional or not. And then the other, so there will be times. And what E&Ms bring up a lot is dealing with jealousy, dealing with your own insecurities. And often people think of them as an opportunity to then think about their insecurities and what's coming up with them. Jealousy is a natural emotion and a natural part of that. Ideally, there's space created to discuss those things, but like jealousy, for example, but still own the responsibility for watching that emotion shift and change and not kind of pour it into the other person. There are more females generally in therapy, but I find that men come for specific issues. I'm ejaculating faster than I would like to. I have performance anxiety issues. Ones that I really love are like, I really want to please my partner and I don't know how to, but that's rare. It's usually very focused on the penis, and what is it doing and is it working with me? Or there will be people who are really struggling because of the grief that they experience from a past relationship. And now they're kind of doing a whole post-mortem on who they are. I think culturally we validate, I think men have been touching their penis since they were in their mother's womb. In some ways, there's been a little bit of a celebration or a pat on the back for boys like growing up, and whereas we don't have that for females. It's seen as often, dirty, shameful, disgusting, whatever, negative. And our language suggests that. But I think the fixation on the penis is because men often associate that as being like a big part of their identity, especially if it's not working the way you want it to. Paradoxically, that kind of detracts from the experience. So men, I'll just tell you this. Let's say with erectile dysfunction, if a man is worried about the quality of his erection, what he will often do is, as soon as it's just a little bit erect, he will want to penetrate because he's like, it's working, let's use it. An erection is simply blood flow to the penis. That's what it is. So because if he's interrupted that flow, right, by putting it into a vagina or wherever he's putting it into, that can compromise the quality, like the amount of flow that's going in. It's much better for him to wait until it's basically more erect and then use it. But the tendency, because of the anxiety, is to use it, which kind of then it's likely to create more concerns for him about his erection abilities. The thing is, anxiety and desire also, they're like a seesaw, and the more relaxed you feel, the more likely you are to enjoy the sexual experience. It's an interesting one because obviously, again, this is a situation where ideally you would have kind of introduced that early on. especially if you know that about yourself. And there's a difference between people who need something in order to have like sexual satisfaction, and people who just like it because it's a bit of spice. Now, if you need it, you need to talk about it, because the partner can't know, especially if it's something that you can't provide for yourself. But how do I work with it? So I often will like do a traffic light system with people, what they love, what they might be interested in, and what's a hard no. Yeah. And then we compare them and meet in the middle. And then we kind of talk about, okay, let's say it's a hard no. Let's say someone wants to be penetrated anally, for example. And the partner is not interested. So we might do things. Well, I'll ask them. I'm never like anyway. So we talk about how they might meet in the middle, and maybe it's like the partner being around when the one who wants to be penetrated is penetrating themselves, or like there's still a component of connection, of being connected in that moment. Or maybe it's also asking like, okay, what is it that you like about this experience? Let's say it's like a leather kink or something. And can we provide that for you in a different way? Is there something else that would provide that the partner is more comfortable with? I think the more you talk about it, the more comfortable people get. But initially, it might be shocking. People sometimes have never heard of the things that their partners like. I generally think, as I was saying earlier, that creating newness within the relation, within sexually, is very, very important. I think it serves the more hesitant person to at least be open to having these conversations. Otherwise, it can create a sense of shame as well. I'm a therapist who thinks that sometimes the goal of therapy is to separate. Yeah. And I will openly say that to a couple. And if there are issues of like safety, if, any of that, that's like definitely no. But usually it's more nuanced than that. But sometimes I do think that the better outcome is for them to live two happy separate lives and never to speak again. But yeah, and I will suggest that, and see what they want to do. I've also said once or twice that I'm not the right therapist for a specific couple, because one of them was definitely already checked out, and this was just a tick box exercise. Also, when someone is having another relationship with another person and they're not telling. So, because I don't have anything to work with there, really. I think if they've come to a point where they're telling me, they have a desire to talk it through with the person. I don't believe that you can have sex with another person and it not and something not and it not something and it being totally outside of what's happening within the other relationship. Whatever agreements you've made with your partner, if you're not sticking to those agreements, then something needs to be changed, really. Some couples do work through it. It's very, very difficult. I think that trust is, for me personally, trust is more important than love in a relationship. There's two answers. One is no point. You could come anytime. I think like having a checkup with your dentist, you should definitely do it. The other thing is, yes, there are some points. So if there's infidelity and you want to work on the relationship, often people come when they are thinking of leaving the relationship, or they want to salvage it. And that's a point at which to come, although I always wish that people had come way before that. I think if there's been any trauma or shocks to the system, and that can be, that can be an illness, it can be a death, it can be moving house, or recurring concerns. finances, children, spirituality, so on, I would say that the most important relationship that you have is with yourself, and that all of your other relationships are a reflection of that.